There is a particular kind of discomfort that shows up in the most ordinary moments. You sit down somewhere quiet, maybe waiting for a friend who is running late, maybe in the few minutes before bed when the house has finally gone still and you notice it. Not pain, not sadness exactly, just a low restlessness, a pressure somewhere behind your sternum, a pull toward your phone or the television or any sound at all. The silence is right there, and you are moving away from it before you have even decided to. Most people will recognize that feeling without much trouble, but what is less often noticed is how different that experience is from person to person. Some people genuinely settle into quiet. They seek it out. They describe silence as restful, as a relief. And then there are other people for whom even a few minutes of true quiet feels like something they have to get through rather than something they can inhabit. Not because they are distracted or busy or impatient, but because silence for them carries a kind of weight. It presses in. It feels like it is asking something of them that they do not know how to answer. This is what this episode is about. Not silence as a concept, not meditation or mindfulness, just the honest question of why quiet feels unbearable to some people and what that discomfort is actually made of. The first thing worth understanding is that silence is never really empty. When the external world goes quiet, the internal world tends to get louder. Thoughts that were being outrun start to catch up. Feelings that were being kept at a manageable distance draw a little closer. Most of the time, this goes unnoticed because there is always something to fill the space. A podcast in the car, music in the kitchen, scrolling through a phone at the end of the day. These things are not always chosen deliberately. Sometimes they are just there, and the quiet never quite arrives, which is exactly the point. Psychologists and researchers who study attention and self-regulation have observed for some time that human beings have a complicated relationship with their own minds at rest. When there is nothing demanding your attention from the outside, your attention tends to turn inward. And for a lot of people, that inward turn is not comfortable. It is not that the thoughts themselves are always catastrophic. Sometimes it is just a vague unease, a background awareness of things unresolved, things unfinished, questions you have been circling without quite landing. The quiet does not create those things. It just removes the noise that was covering them. There is a distinction worth drawing here between two different kinds of people who struggle with silence, because they are struggling for different reasons. The first kind finds silence uncomfortable because it is unfamiliar. They grew up in loud households, in environments that were always busy and full, and quiet simply never became a place they learned to feel at home in. For them, the discomfort is partly habitual. Silence registers as unusual, and unusual things can register as slightly threatening, even when there is no actual threat. The nervous system has learned that activity equals safety, and quiet equals something slightly off. This is a learned association, not a flaw in the person. The second kind has a more specific relationship with silence, and it tends to run a little deeper. For these people, the discomfort is not just about the absence of noise. It is about what the absence of noise lets through. Silence becomes the condition in which certain feelings are hardest to avoid. It might be grief that has not been fully processed. It might be anxiety that hums along perfectly well under ordinary stimulation, but becomes very hard to ignore when the stimulation is removed. It might be a kind of loneliness that feels different from ordinary loneliness, more existential, more fundamental, the sense of sitting alone with yourself and finding that somehow harder than it should be. For people who carry a significant amount of unprocessed emotional weight, silence can feel genuinely threatening in a way that is hard to explain to someone who does not experience it. It is not dramatic. It does not feel like a crisis necessarily. It just feels like something to be avoided, and so it gets avoided, consistently and efficiently through 100 small habits that most people around them would never even notice. Think about the person who always has the television on in the background, not watching it exactly, just needing the sound. Or the person who finds long drives unbearable without music or a podcast. Or the one who, when a conversation goes quiet, immediately feels a pressure to fill it, to say something, anything, because a lull between two people feels to them like something going wrong. These are not character flaws. They are adaptations. They are patterns that develop because silence at some point stopped feeling neutral. There is also something worth saying about how modern life interacts with all of this. The honest truth is that we have built an environment in which avoiding silence has become almost frictionless. It takes active effort now to have quiet. The default for most people is stimulation, and when avoiding silence becomes easy, the capacity to tolerate it tends to atrophy gently, like a muscle that is never asked to do anything. So even people who would not describe themselves as anxious, even people who are doing fairly well, can find after years of constant stimulation that silence has become unfamiliar enough to feel uncomfortable. The ability to simply sit with yourself is, in some ways, a skill, and skills that are never practiced tend to fade. Now, none of this is meant to suggest that needing noise is a problem that needs to be fixed. People are different. Some people genuinely do better with more stimulation, and that is a real and valid variation in human temperament. The concern is not whether you like quiet or dislike it. The concern is something narrower than that. It is whether the discomfort around silence is quietly running your behavior in ways you have not quite examined. Whether the habit of filling every quiet moment is preventing you from accessing something inside yourself that might actually be worth sitting with. Not because sitting with it will be pleasant necessarily, but because it belongs to you, and things that belong to you tend to become heavier when they are constantly being outrun. If any of this feels recognizable, there is no dramatic intervention required. The shift, if there is one, is very small and very gentle. It is just about beginning to notice the moment you reach for distraction. Not to stop yourself, not to force silence on yourself, but just to notice. To become curious about it rather than automatic about it. There is a lot of information in that moment of reaching. The kind of distraction you reach for, how quickly you reach for it, what was happening in the half second before. Over time, noticing tends to soften things, not because the feelings underneath go away, but because they stop feeling quite so dangerous to be near. Some people find it helps to practice very small doses of quiet deliberately. Not meditation, not anything effortful, just letting there be silence for a few minutes while doing something ordinary. Making tea and not putting anything on. Sitting outside without earphones. Letting the end of the day be quiet for 10 minutes before reaching for the phone. These are not cures. They are just tiny rehearsals, Gentle reminders to the nervous system that quiet is survivable, that it is not empty, that you are actually still there when the noise stops, and that being there is not something to be afraid of. This is offered as general insight into human tendencies, not as a substitute for professional support. If the discomfort around silence feels persistent or connected to something heavier, speaking with a counselor or therapist is always worth considering. Silence has a way of asking us who we are when we are not performing, not producing, not being witnessed by anything external. For some people, that question feels like a gift. For others, it feels like a challenge. Neither response says anything definitive about the person. But the discomfort, when you look at it honestly, nearly always has something to tell you. Not something frightening, usually something quite human. The thing underneath the reaching is rarely as unbearable as the habit of reaching would suggest. It is usually just something that has been waiting patiently for a little room. If this kind of quiet, honest look at why we do what we do is something that resonates with you, consider subscribing to the quiet part. There is more here, and none of it is in a hurry.